And all the verbiage about this, the story essentially is on the page 3. Goes over this, and antigenic. There's antigens that are actually proteins on the things that look right, others something that's antigenic on the surface of it, getting made quite right, like protein. And really, the immune system's building keen on proteins. They don't know where they're coming from. The T cells kind of need to check this out. They're looking for them, making sure that we made them. But anyway, we've got two divisions of the immune system, and again, to understand, this is immune system light. This is defense systems light, because I'm not a super expert, but it's fascinating. This is one of the most interesting units to me. But we were looking at the Th2, and the Th refers to the helper cell, H. T helper cell. There's several different kinds of helper cells, and it's an antibody mediated thing. So the cells that proliferate and produce antibodies can do it in just jillions every minute until there's such an enfilade of antibodies that there's no way to miss, and they just turn them loose. Now, the cells that make them are called plasma cells. They don't go anywhere. They stay right where they are and just turn them loose. And they can't miss. They'll bounce off of something if they're not made for it, but if they are, they'll stick to it like I showed you. They'll swarm it, cover up all of its active sites so that it can't do any harm, so it can neutralize it. In fact, that's one of the actions we have here, neutralize and then allow macrophages to come along and eat it up. I don't have to kill anything, but together with the help of sometimes some other things like the eosinophil, they can actually cause the lysis of a worm, helmet, or something. It's out in the open. They can get them to eat eosinophils, degranulate and eat them up. And your eosinophil count would go real high. Things like that. They can also just create IgEs are the things that make inflammation. They just create an inflammatory response. So they can recruit inflammation to help them, to help in the whole thing. And what inflammation is kind of like fever. It just stirs them up. It just gets our immune cells, just turns them on fire, where they just go like mad, like crazy. But it turns out that the invaders are not made for that kind of environment. It can hurt them, it can slow them down, make them sluggish, virilent, and then it revs us up, so then we attack in an enormous number. So this is the antibody-mediated response, and we need, and the primary cell in here that makes the antibodies is a B cell. And yet, we need T cells to help it. Here's the attack side, here's the assistant side. Because in every case, we need a helper cell. That's why it's called the Th2, we need a helper cell. Now, as it turned out, we were looking here at what are the target antigens. Anything that's out in the open, antibodies can get a shot at it. Now, we were looking at microbes that are out there of all kinds, any kind of parasitic thing, amoebas and helminths or something. Proteins that are made by some other foreign critter, microbes or whatever, or another person for that matter. But they're not. They don't have the surface that's recognized. They could be dangerous. The body worries about them. Think they might be dangerous because that's what the history has shown that they can be. But anything like that washes over the B cells, it gets into the lymphatics. They can wash over B cells all day long, but not all of them are programmed to deal with these things. But there are those that are. And when that happens, they get activated by direct contact. And then once that happens, they differentiate. So that's the next thing they do is differentiate. they gotta turn into the cells that produce the antibodies. And so we see that happen. They turn into plasma cells. They also turn into a memory cell. Shane, I'm sorry, I'm in your way. I'm trying to get out of your way, but it's hard for me to do that. They make a memory cell that can live for years and years, just in case it ever comes back in town. And within no time, it will turn into plasma cells and, and more memory cells. You'll always have immunity. That's why if you ever get something, you won't get that again. You should. Now, some things can be simple or something. You get shingles after chicken pox, but that's it's the same critter, but it's a different sequel to whatever the infection was. We don't need to get into every little detail, but nevertheless, we get the plasma cells. Now, there's a little testing done here. There's a skirmishing done. Where they essentially they divide and they begin to proliferate, but in small scale, and test their antibodies on these critters here. They run a little test. There's a little, I told you there's in the leukopoiesis, there's a hypermutation thing. There's another little hypermutation-like thing that happens over here. I'm not going to get into the detail, ask you every little tiny question like that, but it happens again right here. The plasma cells test their antibodies. Some plasma cells make a little bit different. They go through a little mutation process, and the ones that make the best antibody, the ones that actually do the most damage and stick the best and whatever, they're the ones that are spared and saved, and the rest of them just go through apoptosis. That means they just die out. The ones that are making the best antibodies, they hang around, they survive, and then they proliferate in mass. Now, they do that with the help of these helper cells right here, a Th2 cell, a T helper cell number 2. It secretes a substance called cytokines. That's a substance that makes other cells do something. And in this case, it does, and it causes those best number 1 plasma cells with number 1 antibodies, it causes them to proliferate. And they begin to proliferate in great, rapid numbers because these cytokines, it's not that they can't proliferate, it's just it speeds it up 100 times. And good grief, then the rate that these plasma cells can make antibodies is just unbelievable. And they make them and send them out, antibodies, out into the lymphatics and in the bloodstream and wherever. And it has to be in the open. If something has gone to ground, these don't do any good. You need another mechanism. And how do they do it? Well, the actions, once they form a immune complex, that is an antigen antibody complex or an immune complex, that's what they call it, where they form it together, then these things will happen. And in time it will be, the battle will be over. Now, we get these helper cells from T cells that are just in the same areas, usually the lymphatics, and but they're not activated directly, remember? They're activated with a presenting cell, a macrophage, typically the dendritic type macrophage, that's called an antigen presenting cell, or an APC. Of course, to me, that means armored personnel carrier. If you ever had to be in those things, you'll never forget it. But I forced myself to say antigen presenting cell. And they will get a hold of that thing, the same thing that has activated the B cell, digest it, put its odd antigens out on its surface, along with the self antigens. Here's us, here's this, and then it will activate this T cell and it will differentiate. Well, over here, the B cells differentiate just 2 cells. Well, this one differentiates into a lot of them. this helper cell, that's for sure, but also a memory cell too, just in case it ever comes back. And also that T regulatory cell, TR cell. It's a regulatory, that can modulate this, that helps speed this up or slow it down depending on what the need is. And you can see some cytokines being distributed there too. It's kind of influencing what's going on here. And it can shut this down. Once the battle, we don't need to keep spending ATP on this and burning up and having a fever and everything. Says that's enough. Bring the troops home. We can't afford it anymore. The immune system knows a whole lot more than governments, don't they? Still people are still soldiers in Korea when I was over there 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. A long time ago, still there. But at any rate, once they differentiate, it doesn't make one of the key players that is the signature cell of the T cell. That's a killer cell. You know, remember the natural killer cell is like a generic killer cell, a T killer cell. You know, natural killers don't play the part here. They can handle it on their own. They can do whatever. It's just not many of them. But we don't have a killer cell here, not because that's not the business of the antibody-mediated response. We're focused on antibodies. So we don't make a killer cell. A killer cell is a TC cell, lytic, a cytolytic cell that kills other cells. It's not that kind. We don't have to make that one. Not when it's activated this way. So this is a rather complex, two different kinds of cells. Get to know this. This information is good for you to know, just to know. A lot of things about the defense mechanism we talk about will be good personal information. So you can go back over and look at page 3, and you'll see all this stuff that I just talked about is right there, except what we haven't done is get into the T cells and talk about them. So maybe you'll turn to page 4. You'll see that here we've got, this is talking about T cells, and unlike B lymphocytes, they've got to go to the thymus gland. They got more jobs to do. Apparently there's a little more maturation, a little maturing, a little testing or whatever. They don't quite meet muster, they undergo apoptosis, but the ones that do well, then they go on and go to the lymphatics and take up shop and hang out with the B cells. If things come washing through or whatever, APCs present the right kind of stuff, well, if they're programmed, they'll react to it. Mm-hmm. Activation requires that. It's all right there. These notes are pretty thorough, so I think if you go back and read them, you'll see that's just what I'm talking about. Now I've listed 3 right here, the helper cells, and you see that. That's just what I've talked about. Number 2 is killer cells. Now those are the ones we haven't talked about yet, the TC cells. And what they do is, they go out, this is hand-to-hand combat. Now the B cells, the plasma cells don't go anywhere, they just make the antibodies, send them out. But the killer T cells actually do like a natural killer cell. They have to go out and find the thing that they've been activated for and do hand-to-hand combat and kill them. And they're brutal. They'll latch to the thing that they're in to fight, and they will kill it. They'll secrete a poison that will poison the metabolic system in the cell to just kill the whole thing, or they'll produce a lytic substance that'll eat a hole in it Just bleed it to death, essentially. Those are the two main ways that it fights. You see there, lysis and poison. The cytolytic agents are called, a category called perforins, like you would perforate something, that's poke holes in it. That's the name of that category of stuff. The other is called, the poison is called a lymphotoxin. You see toxin, it's toxic to this thing, and it'll wreck the metabolism of a cell. And then you got the TRs, and I mentioned that. And they're important in both that they help them out. They can speed it up, slow it down. They can shut it down too and say that's enough. We see, well, what are the things these fight? Well, that's back over on page 3, but if you look, you'll see what they are. And what does it say? These T killer cells, what does it say that they fight? Go back over and you'll see under number 2, cell-mediated response. What does it say they fight? Primary targets, what's that? Attack fixed antigenic cells.
Yes.
Cells, antigenic cells. Now, in this case, this is when I say that whatever it is has gone to ground. It's gone down a hole. It's now not in the open anymore. A lot of these microbes will invade your own cells and hide in there. See, they think that's safe. Now, we got another way to get them. They detect antigenic proteins on the surfaces of infected cells, cells that get infected with viruses or bacteria. They will see that the antigen's wrong on a transplant tissue, in spite of the fact that you might need it desperately. They'll say that's wrong. We got to kill this cell. Or on tumor cells. Tumor cells being healthy tissue, they say something's wrong with this thing. The cell is going crazy, it's making funny proteins. There's something wrong, they'll see there's something wrong with the surface. Now, natural killer will do that too. But the killer T cells are very specific, for very specific things, and something's quite, they'll fight them. The sad thing is that once, if it turns out that tumor cells can proliferate and overwhelm the immune system in time, sometimes you can't stop them. And the immune system almost seems to quit fighting tumor cells. It's some strange phenomena that they're not quite sure yet. Because again, it's our own cells. And at some point the killers begin to slow down and say, I don't know. That's where various kinds of methods and medicines and whatever come in to try to desperately kill the tumor cells before they kill us. So let's look here at the cell-mediated type here. Let's fill it in. Now this one's called the cell-mediated, Th1. In other words, number 1. The T cells now number 1. They help with the antibodies, but that's their second response. Their main thing is to do their own thing, which is their killers. And so what we see here is right down here, the target antigens. Okay, now what are they? We just read them. Infected cells, tumor cells, and transplant tissue. That's an obvious question. I'm going to ask you something about that. What are the difference in the target antigens of the Th1 response and the Th2 response? Antibody mediated and cell mediated. They fight different things. Now there's some little overlaps in things that you can get into when you get really deep into the weeds on all this, but this is good enough. We'll stop here on the surface and get the main thrust of this thing. And so we see that's what they do. Well, how are they activated? Again, they're activated indirectly. They have to have an antigen presenting cell to do this, and it turns them on. They're only, they don't need the assistance so much of the plasma. It's not that they don't have anything to do with cells that have an antibody attached to it. Very often T cells can use cues like that, but the main thing is what I'm showing you here, is they produce a T cell and it will differentiate into a helper cell. Remember, we saw that on the other T, but this is a T helper 1 cell. This is TH1 type helper cell. So it knows it has a different mission. It's got a different programming. It'll do that. It'll make a memory cell in case you see it again. It can live forever practically. Then we have TR cells, the regulatory cells. Again, to do just what we said before, to modulate this division of the immune system. And it turns out that the key cell here, the one that's going to do do battle, is a TC cell, killer cell. And it's about like a natural killer, even more specific than a natural killer. And natural killers come in small groups, like small squads of police or something. They can only do so much. If they're overwhelmed, here comes the cavalry. And in such numbers of T killer cells, such numbers, there's no escape. Now these target antigens have gone to ground. Now the killer cells have to go find them. They go down in the alleyways and back doors and in the crooks and crannies and closets and wherever they find these things and drag them out and destroy them. That's the killer cells. Now what happens is that they will do a little testing, just like the plasma cells. They're a little skirmishing, and they'll skirmish a little bit with the invaders into these target antigens. They'll skirmish a little bit and find out, and do a little mutation, and find out which one of those killer cells is the best. And the ones that are the best killers, that stick the best, that won't let go, that'll drill them and wipe them out, those are the ones that are spared, and the other ones undergo apoptosis, just like we saw with the plasma cells. Same thing. There's a couple of things here where there's some mutations and skirmishes that go on, and listen, those things are dangerous. You don't want cells to mutate, but the body allows it in a tiny little place, that's surrounded so that it won't get loose, and it'll allow it to happen for a little while until we come up with these best ones, the best plasma cells and the best killer cells. And when we do that, once that's determined, these helper cells right here will secrete their cytokines. The TC cells will begin to proliferate, but at not nearly the speed that it end up with these cytokines showering over them. They just take off like gangbusters and make bukus of killer cells. Now they got to go out and fight, so we need a bunch of them. And so they take off and they go out and find these things. And when they get to them and find them and they latch on to them, what are their actions? They can either lyse them with a perforin, or they can poison their metabolism with a lymphotoxin. I'm telling you, see the story, you keep talking about it. You tell yourself this. And it's good to know it just personally. And it doesn't take long. Finally, they're done. Once it is, the regulatory cells say this, and I think we got them. We got them. Battle slows down, troops come home. The macrophages come in. Their numbers increase a little bit after infection, and they go in and they start eating up the debris and the phospholipids and the remains and out in the battlefields and clean them up so it's pretty much like normal after some length of time. Well, there are things, of course, that can beat the immune system. There's some things can, because the person may be in a weakened condition or whatever, the immune system isn't as strong for some reason. And maybe there's some infections that can overwhelm, pneumonia can overwhelm the person, and especially if they're elderly and weak. and they might be sickly, and something like that, or bad flu or something could take them. And before the immune system can really get going good, because just about nothing can defeat our immune system. But some of these things in a weakened condition can, and could take the life of someone, or just keep them sick for a long period of time. And around the turn of the 1900s, the 20th century, pneumonia was a big killer. Didn't have many heart attacks. Diabetes was hardly known. Nothing like that. It was accidents and pneumonia, other infectious things. But there are other things too, like the bubonic plague and some other things that come through that we don't know. The first round of the COVID things that they created took the lives of a lot of people. We didn't know what our immune systems didn't see. Weren't programmed for it. Figured it out eventually, but bubonic plague, hardly anything can. I mean, they come in, they kill a person so fast, the immune system hadn't gotten going yet. If the immune system could get started and could get going, they'd probably win. But some diseases are just so virulent, and we don't see them a lot. Why? Because they're bad parasites. They kill the host before their numbers increase. I mean, they've done themselves, and the best infections are those that don't kill the host. They just get everybody infected, and they can live in everybody, infect the whole country. The ones that just kill everybody right off the bat, they begin to disappear. Thank goodness you don't see bubonic plague or something like that. So this is the story. So you see the difference. We don't have the assistance side here. We just have the killers in action. Now, let's look at cytokines down here in the middle of the page, page 4. And it says these are secretions of the cells. Cytokines are made not only by these Th cells, these helpers 1s and 2s, but they're made by other cells in the immune system too. One of them that's surprising is the big old lumbering macrophage. You think of it as kind of bringing in the heavy to go do the. No, they're pretty sophisticated, and they produce some cytokines too. And we could go on and mention other immune cells, but just to get the idea that it's not just the helper cell that can produce these things to get other things to happen. Now we see what the Th1s and 2s do. They proliferate. Their cytokines cause proliferation. But there are others that might produce a cytokine that produces inflammation.